When you think of a Roman emperor, what do you picture? Is it a general in a purple cloak, leading legions to conquer new lands? Or is it more of a careful administrator, making sure the trains run on time, so to speak? In this explainer, we're going to dig into Rome's very first dynasty, the Julio-Claudians, and see how they really ran their empire, at least according to the people who were writing it all down. Okay, let's just get right to the heart of it, the big question that every single one of these rulers had to face. What actually makes an emperor great? Is it about aggression, about pushing the borders out and winning glorious victories? Or is greatness found in consolidation, securing the frontiers you already have and making sure the provinces are stable and prosperous? This is the fundamental tension we're going to explore. So, to help us wrap our heads around this, we're going to use two basic labels. On one side, you've got the aggressor, your classic conqueror, always chasing that next big military win. And on the other, the consolidator, the manager, the guy focused on security, good governance, and stability. But as you're about to see, the ancient sources almost never painted these emperors in simple black and white. It's way more complicated than that. So here's our roadmap. We're going to kick things off with Augustus, the guy who basically invented the job of emperor. Then we'll look at the wild contrast between Tiberius and Gaius, a real story of shepherds and spenders. After that, we'll dive into the unexpected conquests and total crises under Claudius and Nero. And we'll wrap it all up by asking the most important question. Whose version of the story are we even reading? All right, first up, Augustus. As the very first emperor, he literally wrote the playbook. Every move he made set the standard for everyone who followed. But what kind of standard was it? Was his blueprint for an aggressive battler or a cautious builder? Well, it turns out the ancient writers were totally divided on this. I mean, if you only read what Augustus wrote about himself in his famous Res Gestae, the answer seems pretty clear. He sounds like a relentless warrior, right? He pushed the border all the way to the Danube, he crushed tribes, he nabbed the jackpot prize of Egypt for the empire, and he celebrated a whole bunch of triumphs. This is Augustus the aggressor, through and through. But just when you think you've got him figured out, you read the historian Suetonius, and the whole picture flips. Suetonius claims Augustus was actually a reluctant warrior, that he only fought wars that were fair and absolutely necessary. This totally clashes with the image of a guy just hungry for glory. So, which one is it? And this is what's so fascinating. This slide just lays all those contradictions right out there for you. You have Augustus himself, in his own words, saying, "I was a victorious commander." Then Suetonius comes along and says, no, he was a reluctant statesman. And then you get Tacitus, who's way more cynical, basically saying Augustus just bribed the army with bonuses. And Cassius Dio, he sees it all as a brilliant political play to keep the Senate weak. 4 major sources, 4 completely different takes on the same guy. And let's be real, even Augustus's incredible record as a conqueror has this massive dark stain on it. The disaster in the Teutoburg forest, where three entire Roman legions were ambushed and just wiped off the map. It was a horrifying reminder that for every glorious expansion, there was a bloody, brutal price to pay. Okay, let's move on to the next generation. After Augustus, we get Tiberius, and then his successor, Gaius, who you probably know better as Caligula. And wow, you honestly could not find 2 more different approaches to running an empire if you tried. This one line right here, which Suetonius says came from Tiberius, tells you pretty much everything you need to know about his philosophy. He didn't see the empire as a battlefield or a bank to be robbed. He saw it as a flock of sheep. And his job was to be a good shepherd, to shear the flock, not skin it alive. He's basically the poster boy for the consolidator model. And you know what? This wasn't just a nice saying. The sources tell us he actually backed it up with action. He was tough as nails on corrupt governors, he built useful stuff like roads, and he absolutely refused to raise provincial taxes. In terms of the military, he'd much rather let Rome's enemies weaken themselves fighting each other than go on some risky new campaign. But, and with Roman history there's always a but, here's the twist. Suetonius argues that later in his reign, when Tiberius basically retired to his island villa on Capri, this hands-off approach turned into pure neglect. He says Rome's enemies, like Parthia, saw an opening and started making moves on Roman land. So what one historian sees as careful consolidation, another sees as dangerous weakness. And then you have Gaius. His idea of military glory was, let's just say, a little unconventional. Suetonius tells this completely bizarre story about how he marched the legions to the English Channel for an invasion of Britain, and then told them to just pick up seashells as spoils of the ocean. Yep, it's a weird anecdote that kind of perfectly sums up the sheer chaos of his rule.
So our next pair of emperors keeps this pattern of wild contrasts going. We've got Claudius, the scholar everyone wrote off who turned into a surprise conqueror, and Nero, the artist, who was so focused on himself that he pretty much let the empire burn.
The big military move of Claudius's reign was the invasion of Britain. This was a huge deal, something even Julius Caesar hadn't managed to pull off. But why did he do it? Well, surprise, surprise, our ancient sources can't agree. Tacitus, ever the cynic, claims it was just a cheap PR stunt to make himself popular. Suetonius, on the other hand, just kind of shrugs and says the whole thing wasn't really that important. So, was it a brilliant strategic victory or a desperate grab for fame? The historians leave it up to you. And that brings us to Nero. With Nero, Suetonius is brutally clear. The guy had zero interest, none, in expanding the Roman Empire. His passions were things like poetry, music, and performing on stage, not the messy, violent business of managing frontiers. And this is a perfect illustration of what happens when the person in charge just stops paying attention. While Nero was busy with his artistic career, the empire started to fall apart at the seams. You get this massive, bloody revolt in Britain, led by Boudicca, that leaves 70,000 Romans dead. Then a huge rebellion breaks out in Judea because of insane taxes. Eventually, the neglect becomes too much, and his own governors just rise up and get rid of him. For Tacitus, the final judgment on Nero was absolutely scathing. To pay for all his huge building projects in Rome after the Great Fire, Nero basically just bled the provinces dry with taxes. His leadership wasn't just neglectful, it was actively destructive. He ruined the very places he was supposed to be protecting. And that brings us to the real takeaway here. We've seen this pattern of builders and battlers, of careful shepherds and careless artists. But every single thing we know, every fact and every story has been filtered through the mind of an ancient writer, a writer with their own biases and their own agenda. So check out this glowing review of Tiberius from Velleius Paterculus. He says, the provinces were finally safe from corrupt officials. Sounds great, right? But here's the crucial bit of context. Velleius served in the army with Tiberius. He knew the man personally. So is he giving us an objective account? Or is he a loyal old soldier writing about his former commander? It makes you think. Now put that right next to Tacitus, writing about Augustus over 100 years after he died. Tacitus was a Roman senator, and the senatorial class was deeply, deeply suspicious of absolute power. So when he says Augustus seduced the army with bonuses, he's not just reporting a fact, he's giving us a political take, one that's totally shaped by his background and his worldview. So this is where we land. Was Augustus a great statesman or a clever warlord? Was Tiberius a wise manager or a negligent hermit? The answer completely changes depending on which ancient source you pick up. History isn't just a list of things that happened. It's a collection of stories shaped by politics, by personal loyalty, and by time itself. The real question for us isn't just what happened, but rather, whose story do you choose to believe?